sporadic cases, so in the vast majority of cases, these unrepaired mutations are usually related to the exposure to a carcinogen. So that's the first point we know. The second point we know is that cancer is a major public health issue, and it belongs to what we call now non-communicable disease, NCDs. And this includes cardiovascular disease, respiratory disease, cancer, diabetes, and everything. And according to WHO, there is about 57 million deaths per year in the world, and 71% of them are due to NCD. So the majority of deaths are related not to infection, but to NCDs. And among them, cancer is responsible for about 10 million deaths every year. So the burden of non-communicable disease, this is for the world, but if we look at the situation in Vietnam, it's even worse. Because in Vietnam, it's not 71% due to NCD, 77%, and almost 20% of deaths are due to cancer in this country. Why? The reason is that this cancer and these NCDs are due to lifestyles, bad behaviors. So if you look at tobacco use, it's 23%, but this is a fake number because if you look at males, it's almost 50%. Almost 1 man out of 2 in this country is smoking. Physical inactivity, 1/4. Air pollution, 1/3, etc., etc. And this is really related to lifestyle. The point also regarding cancer in Vietnam is that you don't have the usual Western Europe type of cancer. Here, the first one is liver, but then is lung related to tobacco, breast, and then again stomach, and many cases related to tobacco smoking. When we look at, this is very important, I'll come back to that slide a little bit later. When we look at the cancer risk factor in Vietnam, 2020, you can see that the first, in 1990, 30 years ago, the first cancer risk factor was smoking. Interestingly, 30 years later, in 2019, the first cause of cancer risk is still smoking, which means that there has been a total failure in Vietnam, but don't feel ashamed. In France too, in United States too, everywhere in the world, globally, cancer was 30 years ago the first risk factor for dying with cancer. 30 years later, in 2020, it was still smoking. So, now that we said that, what are the conditions for a cancer to happen? We said there is an exposure to a carcinogen. This induces some mutation in the genes, and this unrepaired mutation will provoke the cancer. But what we know precisely is that the exposure to a carcinogen is has a dose-response relationship. What does that mean? That means very simply that the greater amount of carcinogen you are exposed to, the higher the risk of cancer you have. For instance, staying 5 minutes in the beach under the sun or staying 5 hours is not the same risk for skin cancer. Smoking 1 cigarette or 40 cigarettes a day is not the same risk for lung cancer. And it is true for the irradiation of your body, doing a CT scan, or being at Fukushima at the time of the failure of the factory. So the exposure, the amount of exposure, can be seen either as a dose or as a duration. Let me show you, for instance, the dose. We know that red meat and processed meat are carcinogen and responsible for an increase in the risk of colorectal cancer. So you can see in the left part that higher the amount of red meat you eat per week, higher your risk of colorectal cancer. And at the opposite, higher the amount of fish you eat, which means you don't eat meat, because you don't usually eat meat and fish, lower will be your risk of lung cancer, so colorectal cancer. So this is dose. Now, duration. Here you can see that whatever the number of cigarettes you are smoking, less than 20, 20, 30, 30, 40, more than 40 cigarettes per day, the longer the exposure in years, the higher the risk of developing lung cancer. So there is a dose-response relationship. Higher the exposure to a carcinogen, higher your risk of having cancer. So when we say that, what can we do? We can either eliminate the carcinogen or reduce the exposure to a carcinogen. Well, we have tried in the past to eliminate a carcinogen like alcohol. The prohibition in the 2030s didn't work at all. There are mafia killing people and everything, and finally, in 1933, they allowed alcohol again in the United States. Same for tobacco with the FCTC, with the WHO. More than 180 countries who signed the treaty, doing a lot of different policies everywhere in the world to try to decrease the number of people smoking in the world. Does it work? How successful have we been at eliminating smoking? So again, let me show you again.